Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces, but also some new ones, some of whom our guest, Natasha, has brought with her, with the Society of Antiquaries. This is really the first in what will be, we hope, a series of international exchanges between the Philosophical Society, which is the nation's oldest learned society, and other learned societies and academies around the globe, especially those in this year of independence with Great Britain. And the reason we're doing so is because of what this slide here says, which is the reason the society was founded. We were created to promote useful knowledge, and when you think about why Franklin and others in the 18th century created the American Philosophical Society, and others in Europe were creating things like the Royal Society or the Society of Antiquaries in 1707, or the French Academy of Sciences. The idea was there should be institutions across the globe that brought people together in their communities to share knowledge, which is what we're doing today and do all the time here at the Society, but also to build connections around the globe to share this knowledge with the wider world, driven by the belief that the advancement of knowledge isn't divided by nations, but is something that we all should partake in and will help improve humanity more generally. And so that's one of the inspirations for why, in this year of independence, the year in which we separated from Great Britain, we're trying to show the continued relevance and importance of exchanging ideas across boundaries and around the globe. And some of the other things the Society is doing this year is we're hosting a conference in Hong Kong. We're hosting a conference in London with the Royal Society in July. And we're hosting a conference, or part of a conference, in Paris, Spain. So we are trying to really embody that spirit in this year, and not just the year, but continue it going forward. And one of the other real inspirations and sparks for this exchange comes from a document that's held in our library across the street. As many of you know, we have the incredible research library, 14 million pages of manuscripts, including about 70 to 80% of Benjamin Franklin's correspondence. We're really the repository of record for Franklin's correspondence. And one of the documents in that collection really, I think, gets at the heart of why we're doing this exchange, but also what it means to be a place like the American Philosophical Society. So if you'll indulge me, just to read to you a passport or a message that Benjamin Franklin wrote to captains in the U.S. Navy and Maritime Marine. This is what he says: "A ship having been fitted out from England before the commencement of this war to make discoveries of new countries in unknown seas under the conduct of that most celebrated navigator and discoverer, Captain Cook, an undertaking truly laudable in itself, as the increase of geographical knowledge facilitates the communication between distant nations, the exchange of useful products and manufactures, and the extension of arts whereby the common enjoyments of human life are multiplied and augmented. The science of other kinds increase to the benefits of mankind in general. This is therefore most earnestly recommended to every one of you, that in case this ship," meaning Cook's ship, these British ships, which is now expected to be soon in the European seas, which is the theater of war, should happen to fall into your hands, you would not consider her as an enemy, nor suffer any plunder to be made of the effects contained in her, nor obstruct her immediate return to England, by detaining her or sending her into any other part of Europe or to America, but that you should treat the said Captain Cook and his people with all civility and kindness afforded to them as common friends to mankind." And it's in that spirit that we want to welcome Natasha McEnroe to the Philosophical Society today. So Natasha is the General Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the Society of Antiquaries in London. It is one of the world's oldest learned societies. As I mentioned, it was founded in 1707, and I believe you have 3,000 fellows around. Is that correct? And its focus is on antiquaries, who are individuals, as she explained to somebody today over lunch. And I'll just leave it there, and I know that that's most of your talk about what the Society of Antiquaries does. In terms of her own background, she has a very distinguished record as a scholar and as administrator. Prior to joining the Society of Antiquaries, she was the keeper of medicine at the Science Museum in London, which I believe is the most visited museum in London. And she also held positions at the Florence Nightingale House and Museum. She's published widely and is the author and co-editor of several books, especially in the history of medicine. She also serves as the trustee of Dr. Johnson's House, Samuel Johnson, and the Erasmus Darwin Museum, and is a freeman of the Worshipful Company of Barbers and sits on the National Accreditation Committee for the Arts Council in England. When she was appointed, the president of the Society of Antiquaries, Martin Millett, noted that Natasha brings both deep experience in heritage leadership and a passion for history, qualities that position her to guide the society into an exciting new era. And that's what we're going to hear about today, both the past, present, and probably a little bit of the future of the Society of Antiquaries. And if I could end with just one small story, and I know this is Natasha's time, not mine, but I met Natasha, was it in the spring of last year? And we talked a lot about what our institutions do and all the similarities between these learned societies. And then a few weeks later, Natasha shot me an email and she said, "You wouldn't believe it. We just hosted a lecture at the Society of Antiquaries, and on their final slide, they thanked all of the people who had funded their research. And the Society of Antiquaries had funded, I believe it was archaeological research, had funded this person, but so too had the American Philosophical Society. So we really, even though we haven't collaborated directly, we've been doing so indirectly by serving this common mission of advancing knowledge." Natasha?
Thank you so much, Patrick. It is an absolute pleasure to stand here this evening, to be with you at the American Philosophical Society, and I'm delighted to have the chance to an American audience to share some of the work that the Society of Antiquaries is carrying out in London. And just to echo, as Patrick has said, there's much common ground between our two organisations, and I think that will become evident as my talk unfolds. And although my visit here is very short, I'm literally here for 3.5 days, I already feel very much at home, and I think that you'd be hard-pressed to find another city that's as interested in its own history as Philadelphia, and I can tell that already. So, there we go. So my talk this evening includes a selection of my own personal responses to the vast collection at the Society of Antiquaries. And even a cursory glance at the website will show you that this is quite a difficult task to set myself, to choose 10 objects out of the huge, dazzling array of things that we keep in the collection. So to help me focus in on making my selection, I have chosen objects that speak to me personally. So I'm being very self-indulgent, you're just going to have to bear with me. But also ones that perhaps symbolise something about the society, whether it's a story from the past or a part of current research that's going on. So it's really perhaps the story of the society through my chosen 10 objects. Some of the objects are better known than others. So as you'll see from the images as my talk unfolds, some of the objects are beautifully, professionally taken, and some of them are shots in a storeroom. So this is very, very much a behind-the-scenes tour, and at least one of the photographs is taken by me because I couldn't find a proper photograph of it. So it's a snap on my phone. So as I say, this is a behind-the-scenes peek for us. So my aim tonight is that we will have an overview of the history of the Society of Antiquaries and its long history, and as well through exploring through my personal selection of 10 objects and artworks, we'll, by the end of this talk, learn more about the history of the Society, what we do, our past and current work. And by ending, perhaps considering a bit about why the study of the past matters so much to us today. Why is it an important thing for us? So to begin with, it's no exaggeration to say that the Society of Antiquaries of London plays a really crucial part in the history of collecting across Britain. Until the British Museum was established in the middle of the 18th century, the society was the primary depository for historic manuscripts, artefacts and books. And it really led the way for the study of our national past in all of its forms. And so in this way, the Society of Antiquaries was to influence the creation of our national museums. And that we can really see in the earliest formation of the great national museums. Patrick mentioned the Science Museum, which is originally the South Kensington Museum. And these all owe a great debt to the various learned societies. So our fellows in that way were focusing on collecting and studying the past long before it was considered a serious and worthwhile activity. In fact, it has to be said that in the earliest days, the fellows of the Society of Antiquaries were considered to be slightly quirky. Not anymore, of course, I hasten to add. But as you can see on the screen at the moment, this watercolour by Thomas Rowlandson of 1782, he's slightly poking fun. This is a new fellow joining the society, and you can see that he's slightly having a tease at the antiquaries. It's not as biting a satire as Rowlandson was famous from. So I like to think that it's done fairly affectionately. The serious study of antiquarianism was to really take off throughout the 18th century. But in the earliest days, this was something that was just like a bit of a funny thing for people to be doing. So bearing this in mind, that the study of the material past was an unusual thing to be doing, how was the society actually formed in the first place? So here, we've got to close our eyes and pretend that we're not sitting in Philadelphia, in the Franklin Hall. Rather, we are in the Strand in London. And it's a cold December night of 1707, and we're hiding away from the frosty, cobbled streets in the cosy environment of the Bear Tavern. And there are three men in the corner who are earnestly discussing something over a tankard of ale. And what they're discussing is antiquities, is the objects that we learn about the past. So this was really officially the first meeting of the Society of Antiquaries. And I always say, I think some of the best ideas in life come to people in a pub or in a tavern. So just a quick word on geography for those of you who are unfamiliar with London. So as you can see from this 18th century map, the Strand and Fleet Street are basically the same road. They changed the name. And this is the historic route that links what's now St Paul's Cathedral and what's now Westminster Abbey. So this dates back to the earliest times of London. They're both on slight hills. But in the 18th century, the Strand and Fleet Street was famous for having a wide crop of coffee houses, taverns, often very, very closely associated with a particular profession or a reason for existing. And the society in its very earliest days held meetings in the Mitre, in the Young Devil Tavern, which I always think is a very glamorous name, and in Robin's Coffee House. So they had a slightly peripatetic existence. The men we can glimpse in the corner, they are Humphrey Wanley. We can see him on the screen at the moment. This is a very large oil painting that hangs on the main staircase of the society in London. And his other two friends are John Tallman and John Bagford. And these three are our founding members. But they didn't stay three in numbers for long. It comes to any good ideas, and more people started to join them. So in many ways, the 18th century was the golden age for the formation of societies. And this was partly contributed to by the coffee houses and the taverns that encouraged this sort of collegiate discussions and sharing of knowledge. By 1718, the Society was formally established with the aim of encouraging the ingenious and the curious in the study of British antiquities. And a royal charter was granted in 1751, and it continued to increase in size and importance throughout the 18th century. So from 1718 until the present day, fellows are elected to the Society itself, and the fellows are people who have shown what we call distinguished service into the study of the material past. And of course, this is a broad and wide subject. It's interdisciplinary, and the fellowship, the interests of the fellowship are also is very, very wide in scope. So fellows might be academics or archaeologists or writers, or they might interact with the material past in a different way. So we have museum curators, conservators. It's basically anybody who is interested in historic stuff, as we call it in the trade. I checked our fellow numbers just before I left, and we're currently 3,227 fellows, and we also have 900 affiliate members. So these are people who share our interests, and they pay. They can use the library and attend events, and if needed, they can get support from our staff in order perhaps to become a fellow, maybe by increasing their publication record or something like that. So on the screen, I did want to share with you an 18th century ballot box, of which the Society holds a very large collection. Now, these are only now used once a year at our anniversary meeting. The Society shifted to online voting in the pandemic, which I have to say is a lot easier in terms of the administration, you can imagine. But I don't know, there's a part of me that rather regrets. I love the romance that we have every year when you can see on the screen it has the little card holder. So the name of the person who's up to be elected is on there. And each fellow is handed a little cork ball. And for those of you who aren't aware of the secrecy behind the voting, nobody can see how you vote because your hand goes right inside the circular entrance, and there's like a sort of triangle inside it, and you can drop your cork ball either into yes or no, and then the unfortunate General Secretary has to pull out the drawers and count up the number of cork balls. So, as I said, every anniversary meeting we do that in real life, and they're lovely objects in themselves, as you can see. So, from shifting around to temporary accommodation, the Society was granted grand apartments at Somerset House on the Strand in 1781. Where it was to remain for nearly 100 years. And then when a different use for Somerset House was required, the Society moved to the newly developed Burlington House on Piccadilly, which we can see on screen at the moment. And you can see the entrance that leads you through into a courtyard. Those of you who know London, the Royal Academy is at the far side, and then the two east and west wings of the courtyard, the 5 societies, the 5 learned societies are housed. So the buildings are purpose-built for each of the 5 societies. For those of you who know London a bit, opposite the frontage of Burlington House is Fortnum and Mason's. I try not to pop in there too often because it's eye-wateringly expensive, but really absolutely lovely tea and biscuits and things like that. So, as you can see just from this building, it's exactly the same. Somebody like me who loves history, it is the perfect place to work because I like to come into work early, and you go through the archway, and as you enter the courtyard, all of the roar of the traffic is left behind, and you have the deserted courtyard that's just it's like stepping back in time. It's exactly like being in Victorian London. It's a real privilege to work there. So the library at Burlington House is the largest antiquarian library in the country, and it is strongest on British and European archaeology, on architectural history, art history, and the decorative arts, especially from the medieval period, and the historic environment and British local history. The library holds 130,000 books, and productions and publication dates range from the 15th century up to the present day, because we are still acquiring, usually when our fellows write a book, which is quite frequently, as you can imagine, they donate a copy to the library, which is rather lovely. And there's always 8,000 early printed books, including 50 incunables. It's an incredibly rich collection. The library is very actively used by all of our fellows, our affiliates, and the occasional visiting researcher. Looking at the images on screen, so the library in the 19th century and the library today, very unchanged, it reminds me that it's a really important moment in time for the Society, because the buildings, although built for us, actually were not owned by the Society. So for the last, maybe 10 or 12 years, the Society has faced an uncertainty of premises. The buildings were owned by the British government, and they started muttering about how they might want to turn them into luxury flats or sell them off. No, I mean, it was a very nerve-wracking time. So I'm delighted to report that last year we signed a 999-year lease on the building. This was as you can imagine, this was a pivotal moment for us. And as with all of these hugely important moments, there are challenges, there are opportunities. So one of the challenges is that we are going to be fundraising to actually pay for it for quite some time. We're currently a quarter of the way through our target. The opportunities are that for really the first time we can examine how to make the building work better for us. You know, we don't want to change what we're doing. We still want to do brilliant public engagement, to run a great research library, work with our fellowship. But there are areas of the building, particularly the basement and the top floor, that could really be put to better use. I don't think anybody has done any work on the basement since the war, which I've mentioned to a few people here. Everybody laughs when I say that, but I genuinely don't think anybody actually has. Anyway, so this, as I've just given you, is a really, really brief overview of the history of the Society. And from the very first, collecting the collection has gone hand in hand with the fellowship itself. Fellows were not collecting for the sake of collecting to furnish their houses or whatever. They were collecting because it followed their passions and their enthusiasm. And because of that, I think the collection at the Society has got a real heart to it. Much of the early material was brought along by fellows to discuss and study, and then it simply just never left the building. So, we're now going to turn to my own favourite objects in the collection, which with great difficulty I have reduced to only 10. And I wanted to start with something that in many ways is a fairly obvious choice for this anniversary year of American independence. The Magna Carta is the great charter of English liberties, first issued by King John in 1215, and it subsequently confirmed in English law and, of course, all of those who adopted English law as their chief constitutional defence against arbitrary rule, including, of course, the US Constitution, the Bill of Rights, as well as the Declaration of Independence itself. So much of American civil rights comes directly from the Magna Carta, and there's a very, very close link. In particular, the rights of the individual, of due process, and the rule of law. Its most famous clause reads, "No free man shall be imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land." So you can hear there's really, really strong reflection there. So the Society owns several important and early copies of the Magna Carta. The one we have on screen at the moment dates to 1225, and it's made up of 3 pieces of parchment sewn together. And I wanted to share with you a fun fact. If you stretch it out, it is 170 centimetres in length, which means it's exactly the same height as my archivist, Kat Peterson. So, the last year saw the 800th anniversary of the third and most important issuing of the Magna Carta, and the Society celebrated by having a special exhibition. So from one British icon to another, Magna Carta to Stonehenge. So from the very beginning of the Society, the Fellows have had a passionate interest in Stonehenge. The Society's first secretary, William Stukely, was already surveying this site when he joined the Society in 1717, and he believed it to be the remains of a great druidical society. And in many ways, the Society has been at the heart of how we think about Stonehenge now. It's such an important part of our history that I thought that having something to do with Stonehenge should be one of my objects. And there are so many visual representations in the collection that I was quite tempted, particularly by this one on screen, which is Stonehenge from the East by John William Inchbold, 1866, which I love. But I eventually settled, I said no to the attractive artwork. I have settled on this Neolithic stone maul, because I think it tells a really interesting story, quite apart from the ancient use of this object. So just as an aside, the Society owns a really impressive collection of archaeological artefacts. So these are generally portable antiquities, ranging from prehistoric to Romano-British, stone, flint, metal tools, weapons. This stone maul that we have on screen at the moment, it's about, my hand's a bit small for it, but it's enough to be used as a hand axe, I suppose. And this joined our collection following an excavation at Stonehenge. So New Year's Eve, 1899, 3 of the giant stones, the megalith, toppled. And the Society immediately wrote to the then owner and asked for permission to excavate before the stones were re-erected. So while they were planning to have it all made safe again, trenches were dug, the contents were very carefully sieved. And as part of a study led by Professor William Gowland, Gowland argues that, very convincingly, that he thinks that the megaliths were actually shaped on site, so using stone mauls such as this one, which was why so many of them were discovered as part of this excavation. There's still so much for us to learn about Stonehenge, of course, but this object that came to the Society in 1925, I chose as my second object because it's quite something to actually hold in your hand. It's got such power to it, and the imagination just takes flight. So this is my second object. Now, the Society has got a small but important collection of manuscripts, with items ranging in date from the 10th to the 18th centuries. And as with much of the collection, there's a really close link between the person who donated it and the object itself. So on the screen we can see an image of the Lindsay Psalter, which was part of a bequest from Charles Lyttelton, who was a president of the Society in 1765. Now, throughout my career, I have been privileged to see and to handle some really amazing objects, but the Lindsay Psalter is one that really does make you catch your breath, both in terms of the quality, the condition, and just the sheer beauty of the object. So it's an illuminated book of Psalms, Old Testament with prayers and a calendar. The name comes from the original owner, Robert de Lindsay, Abbot of Peterborough. And often dating objects as old as this can have a very wide range, but because this one was known to belong to a named individual, we can actually date it quite closely to before 1222. And it's possible to see throughout that different artists worked on it, and you can link together which artist might have produced the same. So that's, a fascinating area of research. I particularly like the initial letters throughout because they're bursting with like little animals. So you've got squirrels and rabbits and things running around. There's a miniature of the crucifixion and Christ in majesty. It's one of the treasures of the collection in terms of importance and value, but I chose it for my selection because of its beauty, but also because it shows how the interests and enthusiasm of the fellowship way back in the 18th century have actually benefited the Society's collection, but also, the national and arguably international heritage, I think, in this case. So that was why it made it into my selection. So one really important part of the Society that I haven't mentioned yet is our connection with William Morris, one of the most famous British Victorians and a fellow of the Society. So, of course, Morris was a pioneer of both design and social reform. He was deeply interested in antiquarianism and medievalism, dating back to the time when he studied classics at Oxford. This is the frontispiece of his book, News from Nowhere, which shows Kelmscott Manor, which is now owned by the Society. This was the summer residence of William Morris and his family. It's now open to the public for members of the public to come and visit. It's in the Oxford countryside. For anybody who is keen on arts and crafts, this is an absolute must as a site of pilgrimage for you. The collection there is made up of artworks, furniture, and personal effects, which represent the applied and decorative arts of Morris and his family, and also the pre-Raphaelite artist Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who lived there with the Morris family for a little while. And Morris took a joint lease on the house in 1871 with Rossetti, and he was to refer to the manor as his heaven on earth. And some of his greatest designs and ideas were inspired by this beautiful rural retreat. So I wanted to choose an object that related to Kelmscott. I go there quite often to work with the team there who keep the show on the road. But my choice of object is actually not by Morris, rather radically. It's actually created by their daughter May. And there's the lovely portrait of May by Rossetti as a child. May Morris was a really talented embroiderer and designer. She was interested in embroidery history. In 1885, aged only 23, she was made head of department of embroidery at Morris & Co. And under her leadership, the company executed some of the most finely embroidered work of the day. So on the screen, we have this wonderfully embroidered textile designed by May, sometimes described as a child's or a cot's blanket. It's called The Homestead and the Forest. And for May, we can see that her beloved Oxfordshire home was as inspiring for her as it was for her father. And this exceptionally detailed textile depicts a rather childlike interpretation of the manor, and it's surrounded with a menagerie of different animals, and these are both domestic and exotic as well. So you can see foxes and a giraffe and a crocodile and a bear. And this was treasured by May during her lifetime and only recently came to Kelmscott. So it's a real joy to be able to have that on display in the manor. There are so many wonderful textiles on display at Kelmscott, but this one, there's something about it that really captures my imagination. There's so many layers to it in terms of its design, its execution, but also the window perhaps into May's mind at the time. Now to move from the visually beautiful to the rather ordinary and administrative, I felt I absolutely had to choose for my selection one of our extensive collection of blue papers, which you can see on screen. This is a digitised image. Blue papers are certificates of candidates for election. So if a fellow wants to recommend to nominate a friend or a colleague as a fellow, this is the paperwork that goes with it. And other fellows have to support and sign. And for me, a blue paper symbolises the extensive institutional records that we hold. They date from 1718 onwards, and they include the minutes of our Thursday night ordinary meetings, often with fascinating illustrations. And these are in big demand with our researchers, which is why they are high up on our list of things to digitise. This has been something that the team have been working really, really hard on. Just on screen at the moment, just to liven things up, we've got the blue paper for the archaeologist Beatrice de Cardi in 1949, looking particularly glamorous there, I thought. But they really are blue, the papers. Another digitisation project that's been progressing really well is the digitisation of our glass slides. This is a large collection. My archivist looks a bit vague when I ask her how many we've got. It used to be 20,000. She thinks it's now nearer 30. Some of them have been published, but some of them just haven't been identified at all. And of course, they're at real risk because they're fragile. We don't really want people handling them. So we have had, we think, 80% of them now photographed in London, and we're rolling out an online cataloguing programme. So we have volunteers all over the place, not just even in the UK, who are beavering away and cataloguing and then sending this data back to my archivist, who does quality assurance, and then it's placed online for everyone's benefit. Sometimes they're labelled, which makes things easier. Sometimes they're not labelled correctly, which does happen not infrequently. So we rely on the expertise of the volunteers cataloguing, who'll say, that's not Cleve Abbey, that's somewhere else entirely. We have one volunteer called Margaret who has catalogued 3,000 glass slides since last October. So thank you, Margaret. So my next choice of object is 4 scenes from the life of St. Etheldreda, Abbess of Ely in the 7th century. Painted in oil, these are 2 panels on Baltic oak. The work dates to about 1455 and is an incredible survival. And there are several reasons that I chose this for my selection. These panels first came to the Society in 1828, bequeathed by the Reverend Thomas Kerrich, who was an artist, a librarian, and a collector as well. And in true antiquarian style, his friend discovered these panels in a cottage in Ely in Cambridgeshire, where they were being used as cupboard doors. This is in the 18th century. So this is incredible that they survived. We think that they were made for Ely Cathedral, and of course, had they actually remained in situ instead of disappearing off to a cottage to be used for their larder cupboard doors, they would almost certainly have been destroyed as part of Henry VIII's break with Rome. So I love that discovery story, which is why it made the selection. But I suppose the main reason I chose this is because it's currently the subject of a really exciting research project. The panels have recently travelled from the Society to the Courtauld Institute of Art, and which is at Somerset House, which you'll remember we lived in Victorian times for quite a while. And they have there a state-of-the-art conservation and research centre. So the panels underwent analysis. The results are not yet published, but I can share with you that the experts are telling us that the quality of the paint and the expense that they would have gone to create them make it very, very likely that only an extraordinarily wealthy organisation like the church could have actually commissioned and had those created. Because Etheldreda is the patron saint of Ely, this analysis further supports the claim that we think that these panels were made originally for the cathedral. So the panels are currently now, having had the analysis, with expert conservators and frame makers, which are going to stabilise them so that they can be displayed and they'll be, safer and just, on more solid ground. And then the final part of St Etheldreda's wanderings is she's going to be going to the Sainsbury Centre in Norwich, which is in the east of England, where for the first time since the 14th century, they're going to be reunited with fragments of the choir stalls and a ceremonial cape. So you can see just how exciting this project is. And for those of you who are planning to be in England between May and October this year, do visit what I know will be a really incredible exhibition. And I hope that very brief description shows you that these sort of collaborative research project into objects, working with organisations such as the Courtauld or the Sainsbury Centre, this is of like a real benefit to the collection and allows even more people to see these dazzling objects like St Etheldreda. The Society's collection of prints and drawings contains up to about 45,000 objects. We've got somebody scoping it out at the moment, mostly dating from the 18th and 19th century. As with photographs and glass slides, these maps often preserve and demonstrate objects that are now perhaps destroyed or changed in some way. The topographical prints in our collection is the biggest in Britain. I was previously under the impression that the British Museum had the biggest topographical collection, but my head of collections looked into it, and apparently ours is bigger. So I felt that I would be remiss not to choose a map, but even with slightly boasting, I actually love the maps in the collection. I find them so charming and evocative. I thought this map that on screen at the moment would be of interest to the audience because it is of America, 1625. I'm an English girl and I'm not an expert in American geography, but I think this map looks a bit odd to me. I'm fairly sure California's not an island, but like I said, what do I know? I just put this map up because I thought it would be amusing. My actual choice is to be within my top 10 is of London, of course, my favourite place in the world. And I don't think that this has ever been displayed. This photograph is by me, but doesn't actually look too bad, does it? So this shows Southwark, which is south of the river, at the centre of London, as it was in 1627. Some of the road names are the same, which is always, fun and interesting. But it's actually the social aspect that really interests me. It includes the extensive estate owned by the Unicorn Inn. So you can see from this map that it's including kitchens, outbuildings, stables, laundries, and you can really imagine the hive of activity in what was this estate really was carrying on, how much hustle and bustle was happening with people coming and going. And this, of course, Southwark is located on an ancient pilgrimage route down to the south coast and beyond to France. So there would be a lot of coming and going. So the Society owns more than 80 paintings, the majority of which are portraits, including a significant group of 16th century works, like this one of Mary Tudor, painted in 1554 by the Flemish artist Hans Ewert. Mary, later Queen of England, was the eldest legitimate child of Henry VIII and the only surviving child of his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. And this is believed to be the only portrait of Mary that was painted within her lifetime, around her 38th birthday, and it secured the reputation of Ewert in England, perhaps only second to Hans Holbein. And we can date this pretty closely because she's wearing winter clothing, but we can see from her rings that she isn't wearing a wedding ring. So we know that it's just before her marriage to Philip of Spain in the summer of 1554. So Mary was to try to reverse the Reformation of the Church, begun by her father, Henry VIII, and to rejoin England to the Catholic Church. But, of course, her marriage to a Spanish Catholic, plus her enthusiasm for burning heretics at the stake, did not make her a popular monarch, as you can imagine. She was known as Bloody Mary. After her death in middle age, the throne was to pass to her younger half-sister, Elizabeth. Seen in the flesh, well, perhaps not the flesh, seen in the oil, in real life, this is an incredibly powerful portrait. And I think that in some ways, the artist has captured something of the rather difficult and painful life that Mary experienced. So moving back in time, my next object is the Beath shield, a Bronze Age shield from about 1300 to 1100 BC. And yes, you did hear that right. The shield is over 3,000 years old. And it was discovered in a boggy area of a farm in Scotland in 1779. And it was in a circle of shields, all sort of planted upright. And this was given to the Society in 1791. And the shield has been in London ever since. The other shields uncovered at the time are lost to us. So it's another example of the importance of the Society in protecting our heritage. Last month, the shield travelled to the National Museums of Scotland in Edinburgh for research and analysis and later display in an exhibition called Scotland's First Warriors. Like the Courtauld Institute, the National Museums of Scotland have got a really fancy conservation research department. So again, we're all benefiting from the research. They're going to be analysing it along with their own Bronze Age shield. And, we're celebrating that for the first time in 235 years, the shield is returning to Scotland. So the Society holds an impressive collection of broadsides. And so I wanted to choose this as number 9. These broadsides are single leaf prints designed to be pasted up, stuck on a nail, news items, entertainment. They're ephemeral by nature, so they're made on cheap paper. So not that many of them survive. we have got a great collection of them, and they are just a fascinating resource for like the small sort of details that might otherwise be lost to us. There's something very powerful about them. The broadside on the screen dates to 1615, printed with both text and woodcuts, and it's telling the story of the Virginia Company, which was created in 1606 to promote the Jamestown settlement, and they sold lottery tickets in order to raise money for the plantation. And the main reason I chose this broadsheet as my number 9 is because I wanted something to represent a more complicated history, and one that, for the Society, there's still work that needs to be done. So according to my catalogue, this provides the early printed illustration of Native Americans in existence. Now, this may be the case. I absolutely would not like to say this for certain, and I would be quite happy to be told that I'm wrong. It states that the portraits are taken from life, showing the men's dress and their names, and the two men are Matahan and Iakin Tomino from the Powhatan Confederacy, who visited London in 1615, the same date as the broadsheet. And they're depicted wearing doeskin mantles, carrying bows and arrows. And according to the poem on the broadsheet, they asked for the British to come and spread Christianity to their people, which, call me a cynic, seems a bit unlikely to me. Iakin Tomino is recorded for a second time in a commonplace book of a Dutch soldier who painted him at St James's Park, half a mile from where the Society of Antiquaries is now based. So this ephemeral print captures a visit, whether taken willingly or unwillingly, we don't know, of over 400 years ago, which speaks of empire, violence, and silenced voices. So I felt that this was an interesting representation of the more work and more research that's due to happen. Elizabeth, could I check the time, because the clock has frozen?
It is correct. 6:52.
No, it says 6:35. That's fine. I mean, I can carry on indefinitely.
But it's 6:52 right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Luckily, it's my 10th and final object. The engraving of the Rosetta Stone, published in the Society's Vetusta Monumenta series. Now, of course, you might be surprised by this because the Rosetta Stone is actually famously in the British Museum. But when it first arrived in Britain in 1802, it went straight to the Society, where it was studied, plaster casts were made of it, and engravings, such as the one that we have on screen at the moment. And this was distributed throughout Britain, Ireland, continental Europe. Everybody was eager to crack the code that would allow us to interpret Egyptian hieroglyphics. So this engraving illustrates perfectly the role that the Society of Antiquaries, but other societies, APS, other learned societies, the importance of international collaboration. This is at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, so England was at war with France, and yet they were still sending papers across. They were still working together, scholar speaking to scholar, which I find something that's quite powerful, the place this plays in this collection. And of course, it's something that's in my mind, being invited to speak here today by the American Philosophical Society, and spending a few days meeting with other similar libraries, museums, societies, and some of whom are in the audience today, and people who've been very generous with their time. The Society does have a group of North American fellows who form an important connection between us in Piccadilly and the US more widely. But the importance, perhaps, of the role of societies such as the Antiquaries in London, the APS here, is even more important during these difficult times internationally. At our last annual general meeting, our president, Professor Martin Millett, spoke passionately of standing shoulder to shoulder with those whose values we share when they come under attack, and of defending core values that underpin Western liberal democracy. He said, "First and foremost, a society such as ours, which celebrates expert knowledge and understanding, must be about promoting high quality, rigorous, and evidence-based research, questioning accepted interpretations and assumptions, rejecting second-rate ideas, and countering false arguments and narratives. The origin of this society lies in such Enlightenment values. Now, more than ever, we should actively and loudly deploy and promote them to defend the values of the world in which we believe." So during the course of this talk, I think we have covered 3 separate areas: learning of the history of the Society of the Antiquaries from its earliest days, and examining objects that tell stories not just of the past, but of current and active research, objects that have ranged from the beautiful to the mundane, and items that have been carefully stored and saved, and others that have just been saved by accident. Perhaps a thought that I would like to leave you with tonight is the wish that we should continue to reflect on why the study of the past is so important. My own view is that it provides perspective, which in turn builds resilience, something that we all need during dark times. And perhaps most importantly, to study the past encourages scrutiny and questioning, understanding the importance of collaboration and of consulting trusted sources, and the realization that sometimes the truth is a hard thing to grasp hold of. Thank you.
So I think we have time for some questions from the audience about the society or the collections, the work that you all do there. I might kick it off with just an observation based on what you just displayed. So it sounded like in the early period of the society, you were collecting a lot of artifacts from your fellows. That's where the bronze shield came from. Now, are you still collecting artifacts, or have you had a shift in your collecting because of space, storage, and other concerns, or maybe the rise of the British Museum and the like?
So we don't really actively collect historic material that much. We do have things that are left to us, and often there are quite large groups of things that are left to us. So book plates, there's a lot of book plates, brass robbings, there's a lot of them. It's only really rarely, for the reasons you outline. Kelmscott is the exception, I think. If there are things that really should be at Kelmscott Manor, then we do our absolute best to grab it. Things that are at risk as well.
Yeah, there's a question over here.
Excellent talk, thank you. You mentioned objects that you have on loan for exhibition, like the Ely panels going to Norwich. Do you place any things, apart from Kelmscott, on long-term loan at other institutions or historic houses?
So there's 2 answers to that question. So we do have material on very long-term loan at the British Museum, and I think just before the First World War, they've kept material that relates more closely to their collections for us. Otherwise, we loan specifically for display and for exhibitions. It's something that we actively promote, and internationally as well. So we're really, really keen. We only have a certain amount of display space, so anything that enables us to really share the collection is good for us.
Hey, there's a question there. So you talked about having to raise money to support the lease, but you also have this other site that you just referenced. How is the Society of Antiquaries funded?
So we have a certain amount of endowment money. Our business model is we have money for subscription from the fellows. Some of them are very generous with supporting us, particularly with legacies and so forth. We fundraise very actively, particularly for projects and so forth as well. And yeah, we're just, I think probably fairly similarly to the APS, just trying to raise the funds to support the work that we do.
Yeah, I know so many European institutions are funded by their government, so I was a little surprised to learn that you are, like us, an entirely independent nonprofit that relies on philanthropy almost exclusively for funding. So we both share that, and we both need it. I see the question over there. Yeah.
So you've talked about the wonderful catalog you're building. Is the catalog completely open to the public? Is it for members? Because you've talked about a lot of things. I sat here taking notes. I'd love to learn more about them.
So a lot of the material is available online, and although the team have been working really hard to digitise and to show like collections, highlights and things, it is a lot of work. I mentioned my archivist a couple of times. We first employed an archivist 4 years ago, ever. So she says that she's got a 300-year backlog to deal with. We have extensive e-resources that is exclusively for the use of the fellows, and even the affiliates don't have access to full. We're a library of what's called a library of last resort. So if somebody can't find something in the British Library and we've got it, then we would welcome them in. And we're also in as part of the university library scheme. So if people have a card of a university library, they can come to us as well. So it's a combination.
And so we share this fellow grantee. So you also support research in the field?
Yes, so we have various restricted funds that, again, available on our website if anybody has a project burning away. It's usually for travel grants or research grants. You know, they're not enormous amounts of cash, but we allocate them really carefully to allow that a big impact is made. We've got a specific one on church conservation that comes from the will of William and Jane Morris, which is something that we're really interested in.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for traveling across the pond. We're thrilled to have you. And I just want to share that our next one is going to be...
End of March with Nicholas Cronk of the Voltaire Foundation.
Yep. So in that same spirit of the Enlightenment values, Nicholas Cronk, who is an APS member and also the head of the Voltaire Foundation, will be coming to talk about not only their work, but the contributions of Voltaire to the Enlightenment and to the American Revolution. So I hope you will all join us. Information's on our website. And thank you again, Natasha.
Thank you very much.